звучить світло, так звучить диво, так звучить життя, так звучить Різдво, наш Щедрик, наш Леонтович, наша історія, яка в часи війни має особливо символічне значення. Великий український композитор Микола Леонтович кілька років жив і працював у місті, що сьогодні має назву Покровськ. Викладав тут музику дітям, створив хор і саме там написав другу редакцію Щедрика, що у ці дні лунає в кожному куточку землі. Так українець подарував світу музичний дух Різдва. І нехай кожна людина в світі, почувши його, згадає Україну. Те, як ми боремось сьогодні за головний символ цього свята, за надію і перемогу життя. На нашій землі, в кожному місті, в кожному містечку, зокрема і в Покровську. Божественна музика написана там, і зло, яке принесла туди Росія, яскраво показує, в чому різниця між нами і ними. Ми прагнемо творити, а для когось сенс життя – сіяти смерть. Ми хочемо спокою, хочемо справедливості, ми хочемо миру. Все, що нам треба – мирно жити на своїй землі, бачити сонце, своє небо, а в ньому різдвяну зорю, а не іранські шахеди і російські ракети. Але декому скучно і не хватає двіжухи. Ці слова – доказ, наскільки вони далекі від Бога, від християнства, від реальної віри. І це є доказ, чому їхня неволя і темрява програють. Ми це знаємо, світ знає це, і це знає Бог, а зло програє. Українці вірять в це і моляться про це, аби все те лихо і весь той бруд зникли з нашої землі назавжди. І українці, безумовно, заслуговують на це.
This researching this kind of topics already for quite a few years now, what I notice is that it's rhyming too well to believe that the people running those operations, like QAnon, but there are many others, and in the far right, they are not aware of the of how the propaganda during the Fascist and Nazi year was structured, because they are, like Heidi was saying, they have certain let's say archetypes, stories, that archetypes target that they start working on. One is the women, so the women as witches. So the women are either the ancillary beings in the greater project of this male-dominated authoritarian world, or if they don't want to take that position, they immediately become witches. They are attacked as witches. They are very much pushed on the side of society. So the moment that you see in a free society women being pushed on the side, it's a pretty good indication to me that authoritarian forces are at work.
The greed will be the undoing of the it's greed that's causing them to do this interference in the first place.
Yeah,
they don't care about the impacts on others. They are greedy, they're voracious, and they extract. It's an extractive mentality. They're extracting from society. They're extracting from culture. They're extracting from politics. They're mining their way through things, and they're leaving a waste trail that's relatively easy to follow.
Thank you for many of the lessons that I've learned from you. Among them, there's no rear areas in an information war. Russia missed the Enlightenment, and we are still living in its dark ages, and to not ask binary questions when it comes to the why of Russia. Is there one last thought you can say on any of that to really help our largely American, but quite frankly, global audience of people who really care about this mind war that continues?
Well, sadly, everything that you've said is still true and has been true for a long time. Now, you mentioned the sudden bursting onto the scene, onto people's consciousness in 2014 of the Russian disinformation challenge. That isn't when it suddenly emerged. That was when most people noticed what was happening. And there was a long, slow buildup before then where Russia was putting in place the tools that it would use to attack Western societies. The problem is those tools evolve, but the countermeasures against them do not. And it takes a strategic shock of the kind that Ukraine had in February 2022 to actually get societies to take an interest in defending themselves against it. If we look for best practice in ensuring resilience, in making sure that the damage is as limited as possible, time and again, we end up looking to the most exposed countries, the frontline states in the case of Russia, Australia in the case of China, but we can learn from them. It just needs the political willingness to actually do so.
Who are the people who do this work? Well, in Russia, there is a profession which is widely known. Everybody knows it just as a plumber or a teacher or a conductor. It's called a political technologist. I'm sure most of you have never heard of such a profession because it does not exist in the United States or in the European Union. So political technologists develop sophisticated techniques based on psychology, history, and cultural and linguistic studies. And that's what they were trying to teach us at the Leningrad State University. They went for journalists. That's what they were trying to teach us at this classified course. And that's what political technologists do. The course was taught to philologists, people who study languages and literature, and journalists.
But yeah, we have in this country, I would say, a host of people who, you know, they've convinced themselves that because quote unquote Russiagate was a big hoax or a conspiracy theory, and that, you know, Mueller himself did not frog march Donald Trump out of the Oval Office in handcuffs and accuse him of being a Russian spy, and then, you know, pull back a curtain and Boris and Natasha are there in handcuffs and Boris is twirling his mustache and Natasha is speaking in some cartoonish Russian. No, seriously, this is what people were expecting.
Right.
Because they don't know how counterintelligence works. They don't know how law enforcement works. They don't know how espionage works.
True.
Because none of this happened, they've now convinced themselves that Russia has been exonerated of all malevolence and wrongdoing, that they didn't interfere in the election in any way, that if Putin invaded Ukraine, that too was the fault of the CIA and the State Department, and Russia is the victim rather than the perpetrator. Now, this is a great success, an accidental one for Moscow, because again, I think they interfered with the election with an eye toward muddying the waters, weakening Hillary Clinton, creating division and polarization. Did they think that they would actually succeed, or did they think that their dark horse candidate would win the presidency? Maybe not. But the fact that he did, and the fact that we began litigating the extent to which his presidency is the result of a foreign intervention, was a gift to the Russians, because now they look like they can control America's political establishment. Whether or not they can, I mean, I would argue they cannot, but we are doing our utmost to give them a lot of props and a lot of credibility.
Wow.
And, I mean, right now, what you're seeing is America's tearing itself apart. The fact that Donald Trump has at least a 50% chance of regaining the White House is absolutely terrifying to somebody like myself and to our European friends. But to Russia, they cannot believe their good fortune. So what are they going to do? Again, they're going to amplify people who are already predisposed to supporting. It's not even that they're pro-Putin and pro-Russian. Some of them are. Some of them have legitimately drunk the Kool-Aid that Putin is this sort of bastion of religious conservatism. I mean, he's literally built himself a $1.5 billion Kubla Khan pleasure dome on the Black Sea with stripper poles. I mean, this is the most, like if this guy were in an 80s movie, he'd be in the backseat of the limo, getting blowjobs, snorting lines of coke off prostitutes. I mean, he is as conservative as Larry Flint was conservative, right? But you have people who legitimately think that this guy is, he stands for everything that they want to believe in. Ultra patriotism, orthodoxy, blah, blah, blah. Fine. So they're not very bright, or they haven't bothered to interrogate the issue. But then you have people who they have such disdain for their own country and their own society.
If you have such good condition to be a human and express yourself in a different way, you should use your power, your ability for protect the democracy. Because Americans like to tell, I like democracy so much. I don't want to give away to someone. Never. Okay. It means you should take an action on your own understanding and educate yourself too, of course. But be kind to others too, because
what we're seeing is a classic fascist grouping in many countries. What do I mean by a fascist grouping? What I mean is a kind of corrupt party or leader telling the Christian conservatives, the evangelicals in the country, that he will get their agenda done for them, telling the big business interests, especially the petrocarbon industry, that he will make sure that no climate change legislation happens. We're finding a very typical and standard, back to Nazi Germany, link up against labor movements, where the corrupt fascist, the corrupt leader or party is saying to businesses, we'll take care of your labor union problem. We'll make sure you can keep on polluting the environment, exploiting your workers, and then telling evangelicals, the LGBT community is a dire threat to your children. Then we're seeing in the United States, we're seeing increased anti-Semitism, which is predictable. We've been having many years of dog-whistling anti-Semitism. So this fascist grouping of religious nationalists, together with big business, behind an autocratic leader who's representing democracy's liberties as an existential threat.
I mean, it goes back to this, to go back to the very beginning about the stealth genocide idea. So it's this idea that I was inside what I understand now was a stealth genocide. Russia was preparing the ground to teach and inculcate in Ukrainians in Russia-occupied Ukraine that they weren't Ukrainian, and preparing them to kill their fellow Ukrainians. And for the Russian, it doesn't matter who's killing whom. The point is to get rid of Ukrainians. And if I, as an internationally trained lawyer from the esteemed Cambridge University, who had studied the Holocaust and stuff, was inside this world for 7 years, and I didn't realize it, then I think that's a good little parable to say we've just got to keep what I call our incoming troll radar.
What mystifies me is that our intelligence services can warn Putin ahead of time that a terrorist attack was happening on his soil, but they refuse to warn Americans that we're being attacked by Putin's information war all day, every single day. I track it constantly.
Yeah.
And I know it's not necessarily, your expertise, but I'm very curious what your thoughts are about why our government, our intelligence community, our military refuses to recognize this threat for what it is, which is a very deeply dangerous, subversive psychological warfare campaign that is, in my view, captured somewhere around a third of the country. And I don't understand why we haven't warned, explained, or pushed back in any way on this, at least in my view.
Well, I don't know it in as much detail as you are. It's not my particular focus, and so, but I can't help but look at it in a broader perspective. I've as in my life, I've grown to admire so much about the United States, and one of them is how the United States has managed to successfully institutionalized ideas about liberty and so on, and build a enduring democratic institutions to sustain that. And that's been incredibly admirable. And a kind of ingrained tolerance, things like freedom of speech and so on. But the consequence of that is the United States has historically been really bad at dealing with actual treason.
I want to continue this topic about the Hague in Bulgaria, if I can.
Please.
Yeah.
When we staged The Hague in Sofia in Bulgaria, whole government was present, including pro-Putin party, including pro-Putin politicians and members of embassy, and they were watching the play. And at the moment when Putin appeared on stage, and this role is always played by a woman, brilliantly played by a woman, with this makeup making her look like Putin, and it was so fun, and people looked at it and they started snorting as if it was a seance of exorcism. They couldn't believe that this could be shown on a stage, and that's how it went in that theater, very old theater for 750 plays in a room, and with all those pro-Putin politicians looking at the truth.
We cannot handle the evil. We cannot. We are afraid of touch it, because it's some kind of I don't know why actually, but I think probably because people feel like if I touch the evil, I will be like it's like a disease, I don't have to have a connection with that.
He helped get Clarence onto the Supreme Court.
Exactly.
But Roberts and Alito, he picked, vetted, campaigned for, got them confirmed. Then Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Amy Coney Barrett. So he's got six of 9. I don't oppose extreme devout Catholics being involved in the political, public square. I do oppose 6 of anything.
Yes, of course.
Dominated. I don't care if they're Muslims, Scientologists, Mormons, atheists, whatever. 6 of anything dominating the Supreme Court is not democracy.
If we all widen the lens, look at the geographic position of the Black Sea and Crimea. That is at the mouth of a whole area. That's a whole sea lane that goes down, to where we're seeing now let's see, you would have to go through the Suez Canal, and then you're basically looking at Israel and Egypt. Okay, it's at the mouth of Egypt. So that's a whole sea lane there. And that's what a lot of people, whenever you look at these things, look at it geographically to understand the importance. Another thing too, in the north part of the Crimea, the north part of the Black Sea, that's controlled now by the Russians. But the Black Sea is also an area where there is heightened criminal activity because of trafficking, human trafficking,
Yes.
drugs and arms.
Yes.
They control that and they want to keep that. Okay, so let's remember, it's not just the Russians, we're talking Russian mob, okay, that control those sea lanes and not all of the imports, exports. And it's fundamental that that area goes back into Ukrainian hands, NATO hands.
What do you think has changed with the Russian people that they have this appetite for the slaughter of their citizens? Because I think back to Afghanistan, and they hit 100,000, and people in Russia were freaked. Mm-hmm. And now 3-4 times that in Ukraine, but it's okay to the Russian people. Is it just the brainwashing of the Russian government? What is?
Okay, so the Afghanistan comparison is very interesting, because that was a conflict that the Soviet Union were involved in for a decade of war, and they saw a fraction of the casualties that they've seen here in just a little over 2 years in Ukraine. I saw this report from the UK Defence Ministry as well, and it was 465,000 dead and wounded, not just dead. Okay. But in a Western expectation, we would expect to see the killed in action to wounded in action ratio to be 1-6, 1-7, something like that. But with the Russians, it's probably like 1-1, right? Because they don't do medevac. They're not taking people off the battlefield who might actually have a chance at surviving if they were to get medical care, and they haven't been doing that since day one. I mean, it's even worse than that. It's not just leaving people to bleed out on the battlefield. Anybody who's retreating is shot by the Russian side. They're shot by these barrier troops, which has been an age-old Russian/Soviet tactic as well to motivate people, I suppose, is the best way that we describe it. But Russia has become, and it is exactly as you put it in your question, Hi-Fi, a result of propaganda. Russia has become a death cult.
do you feel that anything you saw in this group chat rises to a level of criminality that concerns you such that you feel you should contact law enforcement about it?
No, because I mean, there's discussion of arms deals to Israel. And I'll be writing about this within the next couple of days. 3 people in the group are arms brokers. And there are more than 3 who are arms brokers in the group, but 3 of the arms brokers make offers to a guy named Moti Kahana, who says he's an Israeli-American businessman, and he says he's an intermediary with the IDF. One of those deals was, I mean, I don't see any other way that it wasn't just flatly illegal, because there's a discussion of, the weapons, the equipment can't be sent. I'm paraphrasing, but it can't go to Israel, so it will have to go to another country where you can get an end user certificate. I've written a lot about arms trafficking over the last 20 years. The minute I saw this, I'm like, okay, this doesn't look kosher.
My name is Adam Sibera. I'm from the Czech Republic. My background is in international protection of human rights. And currently, I participate in Team for Ukraine on information analysis and war crime documentation. Yesterday, I arrived from Kharkiv, and today, I would like to speak to you about this job, about propaganda, and about something I call the mental invasion. Information, access to it, and its dissemination has always been a powerful tool of social coercion. Social media and the rise and development in artificial intelligence has made meddling with perception of reality easier than ever.
В школах, в палацах, позашкільна освіта, інститути. І діти, коли дізналися, що я потрапив на фронт, вони почали передавати через мене вітання героям. Готові? Добре. Тоді уважно. Вітання від дітей. Ви маєте зробити те саме. Наш рівень якраз такий самий.
Моє ім'я Валерій Дзех. Я військовослужбовець 59-ї бригади. А також є учасником культурного десанту, і я там лялькар. Я хочу, щоб військові в якийсь момент просто опинилися в своєму дитинстві. Щоб вони згадали, що таке дитинство, що таке мріяти і що таке створювати, будувати.
Крок за кроком. Йти вперед до своєї мети.
Bella cosa, una giornata e sole, un'aria serena, dopo una tempesta, per l'aria fresca, pareggia la festa. Che bella cosa, una giornata e sole. Giornata e sole, che bella iene. Oh, sole mio, sei in fronte a te. Oh, sole mio, sei in fronte a te, sei in fronte a te.
If we speak about agents of influence and we completely stick to the definition, then this is actually somebody who works. It's almost like they have a deal, they get paid, yeah, for the job. It's not the way we use that term now, because in most cases, unfortunately, we don't know, are they paid or not? And it would be wonderful to know it. We have one case German journalist. He wrote a book about Putin. He was always extremely close, extremely apologetic of Putin, defending him, defending his policy. And he was invited to TV, to many events. And suddenly in 2023, the world learned, because of investigative journalism, that he received $600,000 from oligarchs close to Putin. Yeah. And this is the best thing that ever can happen to you, because now everybody understands the context of his communication, because this guy was presented as a journalist.
Those red states look an awful lot like the United Confederate States of America. And they are. And I think what's happened since Trump is what we have now is sort of the Confederacy 2.0.
In a next Trump presidency, are those of us who do investigative reporting, are we safe?
That's called a softball. No, I think it's just petrifying. I mean, if you look at Project 2025, this is a recipe for the end of democracy. It is as simple as that. I spent years not using the word fascist, and now I have to use it occasionally, and this is the brink. And one of my best friends is German, and he says it's 1933 in Germany. This is where we are.
Do you think that what happened in Mexico when it comes to voting and the irregularities and all of the strangeness and the death, should that serve as an incredibly strong warning for the United States from Mexico?
I think it should. And I think that the problem is that, again, obviously every country has its own, its own threats, its own issues, and its own cultural implications that may dictate the way that politics operates, right? But I think that the common trend that we are seeing is erosion of democracy.
Since Cambridge stopped and said, the disapproval of Brexit has just gone straight up, which seems to me the perfect example of what happens when psyops wear off, right? So I just wanted to get your feeling about, that, whether that seems like a correct assessment, and how that relates to the current campaign.
I think psyops have worn off, but also reality has kicked in here in the UK, and
more or less the same thing.
Yeah, we know. I mean, we can feel the damage that Brexit has done. We can feel it in every aspect of society here.
Regime security is a very central motivation for Putin's foreign policy. There is a tendency to think in international relations realist circles that Putin is primarily concerned with national security. And I think that a conception of national security that is quite weird and mystical does play a part in Putin's foreign escalation. But at least half of the motivation of that regime is about regime security and preserving power. And one of the things that we are seeing in Ukraine is Putin understanding that an independent Ukraine with moderately functional democratic institutions, even without membership of any Western alliance, is an existential threat to him.
I left the house, walked about 30 meters, and heard the sound of drone. I looked up, saw a drone, but it turned out that it was flying the other direction. I hid by my neighbor's fence, but it saw me and started moving towards me quickly. I started to run. I got lucky. I ran away. Where did you run? Across the street to a big building. Did you hide there? I hid there. And it turned around, returned to where I was hiding, and blew up there. It thought maybe someone else was hiding there.
One of the things that I think is really important to understand about both these riots, but more on a broader scale, the modern far right, is that we are looking at a networked movement. And I think this is something that the British, I don't want to say the British media, I'm in the British media, but that Britain has kind of struggled to understand. We've got a very traditional view of what the far right look like. It's men in back rooms of pubs following a leader, having a ruckus. And it's a very clear hierarchical structure. But what we're seeing now is more of a networked online movement, which coalesces not around a leading figure, but around an ideology. And that ideology is Great Replacement. And what we have at the moment is Elon Musk basically trolling the UK Prime Minister, like in a completely bizarre way. And what does the Online Safety Act do about that? It's a piece of British legislation. It can't touch Elon Musk for saying that civil war is inevitable in Britain. And so I think there's a really, like every government in the world, not just in the UK, is grappling with this issue of how do we challenge the tech giants? How do we protect freedom of speech while also making sure that hate speech and incitement to violence isn't allowed to flourish on these platforms?
Billionaire donors. Can you tell us a little bit about how you tracked the donors to the organizations, to the people, pushing the vouchers and the fake studies around voucher benefits?
Well, it's important. I mean, so I'm glad you mentioned Professor McLean. So her work by the journalist Ann Nelson, work by the journalist Jane Mayer, are all work by the journalist Catherine Stewart, are all writers whose work I draw on and kind of pull together in The Privateers. One way to think of my book as kind of the education specific, the voucher specific story for the larger story that those great writers are trying to tell. But one decision that I made early on in the book, in the research for the book, was to rely exclusively, with just a couple of exceptions, rely on publicly available documents. So IRS 990s, campaign finance reports, a lot of great press. And then as a professor, I talk about my own sort of role in working as a young scholar 20 years ago on some of these pro-voucher studies and how those things get assembled and by whom. And so Heritage is a big player in that space. The American Federation for Children, which is Betsy DeVos's think tank, is a big player in that space. And all of these groups are connected through, you mentioned the Council for National Policy. This is a right-wing kind of network of politics and policy. To quote Dick DeVos, Betsy DeVos's partner, you're connecting the donors with the doers through the group, the Council for National Policy. And so this is how it gets done. And what I point out in the book is that not every voucher study out there done by all of these people is necessarily wrong or is necessarily, they're not necessarily cooking data. But what's happening is a case is assembled over time, very much the way that a political campaign war rooms against an opponent candidate. And so what's happening here is you can't blatantly put false statements on television. The FEC has something to say about that. But what happens is very much like negative campaigning against public schools, against critics of voucher programs. And that's how the case gets assembled by these folks over time.
It's the connection between these seemingly disparate events. The 6th January insurrection, the riots in the UK, the war in Ukraine, the elections of Donald Trump, the elections of Nigel Farage, these are not things which are disconnected. They're intimately connected, and they're part of not necessarily. I mean, some people would say, "Oh, so what you're saying is you're referring to a conspiracy theory." No, we're not talking about a giant singular cabal. This is a heterogeneous network of people who actually disagree with each other on lots of things, but they're getting more and more aligned around these shared alternate realities, these shared crazy ideas. And I think that one of the things that I've found most scary about this, and I think I when I came across Jim, your Substack recently, and I was like, wow, this guy gets it, because I've been for the last few years have been saying, guys, we're not just dealing with neo-Nazis; these are literal Nazis, like actual Nazis, that like they actually believe really crazy Nazi ideas, and they don't want us to understand that. And there's very few of us who recognize how deep that rabbit hole goes.
So they invented a sophisticated method how to get rid of the critiques of the regime in an invisible way, without any trial, without put them to jail, without killing them, torture them. And they just employed secret agents who, for example, in the night, they went to your apartment and stopped the clock working, that you didn't wake up in the morning and you were late to your job, or to such a detail. So they worked on it, and they based everything what they did on psychological profiling of your personality. So they were never the same like mirroring methods. Every single individual was targeted based on his weaknesses. They tried to find your vulnerabilities. What's your weak spot, and to hit the weak spot, to dismantle you, to cause your trauma, to deprive you of your social capital, and to make you an outsider no one ever will talk about again.
The title Vigilantes, Inc., just so you know, that in 1946, the Ku Klux Klan had the same plan as Trump and his 2,000 Mules crew. They had a plan to knock off all the black voters of Georgia, and they succeeded and elected the Ku Klux Klan leader, Eugene Talmadge, as governor of Georgia. But you know what? In 1946, Harry Truman said, that's illegal. And the FBI was about to indict Governor Talmadge for challenging all these black voters. And but he had an accident. He had a collision with a bottle of bourbon, drank himself to death just before the indictment came down. And you'll see this in the film. Wow. But Vigilantes, Inc. is the name that the Ku Klux Klan incorporated under. So Vigilantes, Inc. is actually the name of the corporate name of the Ku Klux Klan. And Trump has literally revived the Klan plan for 2024.
I spoke to the US head of Opus Dei, the guy who was head of Opus Dei in the United States in the 2000s and the 2010s. He told me, I paraphrase him slightly, but these were almost his exact words. He told me that the Da Vinci Code was the best thing that's happened to Opus Dei almost in its entire history. So Dan Brown almost did them a favor. So, clearly Dan Brown's novel was a work of fiction. And what he did was he took, and novelists do this the whole time. They take elements of real life and they fictionalize them. And Opus Dei was able to run with that quite successfully. So what it did was it said, look, this guy, this albino monk that's out there assassinating figures and stuff, this is so like left field and so crazy that, look, if you really want to learn about the real Opus Dei, then we'll come and we'll tell you all about it. So they used it very successfully to market themselves to a much bigger audience. Suddenly the book catapulted them into the mainstream, and they were able to really ramp up the recruitment efforts. So the Da Vinci Code did them a huge favor, in fact. Although, some of the elements that Dan Brown touches on in his book are absolutely true. He talks about, the group's medieval practices and its abuse of women. He talks about these things in the book, but because obviously he kind of goes a step too far in fictionalizing things, that they ran with that and were able to not address the real issues.
A candidate who's very close to Vladimir Putin. He's close to Bibi Netanyahu, and he's close to MBS, who gave $2 billion to his nephew. I mean, so these are serious relationships, and they're all players on the world stage. So the big question is, will it happen again? And, I don't know exactly what will happen, but I will say, does anyone think there'll be an election with no malfeasance?
What would you say to those people about these tricksters who abase religion for personal gain? And how would you reassure them that there is something still good in religion?
Well, religion has always been a mixed bag, right? Because religion originates in that part of humanity that is trying to make meaning of the world. We're trying to make sense of the world. And so religion has been a force of great beauty, of great insight, of great power, of great kind of powerful experiences, of great communal connection throughout history. It's been a force of great charity and care for the least in society. It's also been a force for great evil, right? I mean, I'm a Christian. I'm proud of being a Christian. I will admit, though, that Christianity has given us the Crusades. It has given us pogroms. It has given us anti-Semitism. It has given us Islamophobia. It has given us colonialism and all kinds of different forms of racism, right? Like, we don't need to be precious about Christianity. Christianity is a human tradition, and it's got all the weaknesses of humanity and all the strengths of humanity built into that. Where I come back to is the nature and the character of Jesus as a Christian. And that is where I think the NAR and their kin are furthest from mainstream Christianity. I think they're still Christians, but I think they've lost sight of the Jesus of the Gospels. They've lost sight of Jesus, the one who was executed by the empire, right? The one who stood against claiming earthly power every time that it was offered him. And they have said, well, now Christianity needs power. Now Christianity needs to have political power. And as a student of history, when Christians have had political power, it has rarely worked out well, either for Christians or for society.
I think the fact that Vladimir Putin, who is someone who actually hates the US and wants the US not to succeed and to fail, and the fact that he's putting so much money and so much effort into getting Donald Trump into the White House, that is a strong sign that maybe he's not working in the interest of the US. And of course, if we listen to what Donald Trump says and what the people around him say, Donald Trump was already a bad man in 2016, but he's even worse now, because back then he had some mainstream Republicans around him who were not all isolationists and not all working on behalf of Russia and China, but now he's surrounded by people who actually work for foreign interests, or at least act as if they were working for them. And it's for Europe, it's existential, but for the US as well. So it's a very important election. And of course, there are a million things that Trump has done wrong, and he doesn't really have much going on for him. But I think American normal middle-class families and parents should think about the message they're going to send to their children if in 4 years or at some point Trump is the president and Trump is turning the US into some sort of more authoritarian country than it is now. And when Trump has more scandals and more issues, how will they explain to their children that they voted for this person who is a rapist and a convicted felon and who is a traitor to the US, works for Russia? How will they explain that, and how will they feel about it? And all that for just because they fell for Russian disinformation and for Republican disinformation.
And one of the things that is strikingly absent from the debate, again, within the United States, but it's very pertinent elsewhere, is the way in which anybody that looks at Russia for a living and looked at the last Trump presidency was in absolutely no doubt that Trump was working on behalf of Moscow. For whatever reason, we don't know, whether it was because he was induced or made to do so through some mechanism, or simply because his instincts were completely in tune with what the Kremlin wanted. Every single policy initiative, every statement, everything he did was actually furthering what Russia wanted for the United States, and was very damaging to the US itself. Now, he says he's learned from the previous instance, and now he will be able to outwit and overcome those democratic checks and balances that prevented him from doing the worst damage last time. And yet, nobody in the United States appears to be talking about this, about an agent of a hostile power that wants to take power and finish the job on behalf of Moscow. That appears to be a glaring gap in the whole conversation that's ongoing at the moment.
And another thing I would emphasize here, both for people of younger generation who don't remember the Soviet Union, and even for those of us who do, is that it was the largest, most far-reaching, deepest penetrating, grandest scale social engineering experiment ever performed on mankind. We are still in some ways coming to terms with the sheer scale of the experiment and the sheer scale of the catastrophe. It was in many ways unprecedented. It was an attempt not just to remake a government and not even just to remake a society. It was an attempt to re-engineer human beings on a massive, massive scale.
It feels like billionaires are trying to murder the future so they can get another dollar.
Yeah.
Wow.
What are your thoughts on that?
Wow.
Yeah, that was a pithy version of one of the most important questions we face.
That's his area of expertise.
Yeah, I can tell you by way of preface to my answer that I am a board member of an organization called the Excessive Wealth Disorder Institute. So I could not agree more. You know, this
Can I get a membership card? Can I get a membership
Yeah,
card?
but this is another place, right, where we have to start changing the language we use, because you're exactly right. It is a disorder. These people are sick. I mean, literally, can you imagine, like, here you are, you know, I know Charles Koch the best, but you have over $50 billion, right? Over 50, like, you can't even, who could spend that? You can't even do anything. But at this point, you have to assume that their brain circuits, right, are so distorted from the years of the adrenaline rushes of getting to that amount of wealth, like Elon Musk, you know, or these other people, and they're getting more and more crazy because they just want to keep going back and sucking more wealth out. And for me, as a US historian, the best analogy that I can think of is the enslavers, right? Who brought on the Civil War, going back to your point, Heidi, about treason and traitors. You know, the militant enslavers of the South, you know, excited by people like John C. Calhoun. John
Yes.
C. Calhoun, who said on the Senate floor that slavery is a positive good as an answer to abolitionist organizing and agitation. John C. Calhoun envisioned this whole system, this kind of anti-democratic system that was later picked up by James Buchanan, that I wrote about, and Charles Koch. But so they understood that the biggest plantation owners, the people who made the most money from trading in men, women, and children, you know, who were in bondage, that they treated as property, they understood that in a republic, in a place where there was popular, you know, we the people were supposed to be in control, that system could not last, right? That democracy was going to come after that system, which it began to do. And so that is why they seceded from the Union, to be able to continue their highly profitable and absolutely disgusting enterprise, right? They're morally reprobate, you know, I mean, like there's so many words you could use for what they were doing, which we could also repurpose for fossil fuels, right?
Yes.
That same drive that you're talking about, where the most crazy luxury is never enough, right? You know, if you own 400 people, you want to own 600. You know, if you have, you know what I mean. I mean, that's I'm
Yes.
ranting now, but your point is really important in that we have to start recognizing there's something wrong with these people, right?
Yeah.
Like they are not figures to be emulated. They are figures to be controlled for the survival and the well-being of the rest of us. I also like the phrase that, and I can't remember who I got it from, but our capitalist overlords. I think that's a good one, you know. But these people are riding us, right? They've got the saddle on. They've got now the spurs and the reins. And the question is, are we going to overthrow them, or are we going to let them ride us into perdition?
The Helsinki Commission recently released a report on Russia's shadow war and identified 150 different operations, as you see here. Quite a few in the United States, obviously. What is keeping Biden from acting?
Nothing. Nothing is keeping him from acting. He has a duty to defend the United States. It is actually his first duty.
Yes.
It's his first duty, and nothing is stopping it other than just a failure of vision to realize what's going on and how the catastrophe is here. You know, people say things like, oh, you need Congress to declare war or something. And so, no, you simply just say this is what's happening. Russia is at war. This is the nature of the war. These are the campaigns of the war. And it also puts Trump in a box about where he stands in all this kind of thing. You know, why he doesn't do it even just for political expediency is completely beyond me.